Again, everyone, this is Indie Fireside, led by Senor Vance over there on
Hello.
my left. I forgot the images are opposite on that side, and he leads us every month. The first of every month, which I guess we should announce. Did Eric ever get back to you? If not, spam.
Okay.
Beginning of every month, we choose a game to talk about in depth at the end of the month, the last Friday of every month, and we invite whoever wants to come on. One plus, doesn't matter how many people, to be honest. Whoever wants to come on and talk about it with Vance.
100 might be a little hard to handle.
That'd be interesting. If it got that big, we'd probably be like, hey, let's make a line. But for now we're letting a group of people on. Today we're joined by Zach, audio only, since because it's weird with cameras. We only have two panes. It's not enough room, that sort of stuff. But he's not using camera anyway. It's just audio, so it all works out. And so today, the Thin Silence, and I'll let Vance take it from here.
Hey, it's me, Zach.
Yeah.
Hello. And yes, welcome to Indie Fireside, where we talk about a different indie game every month, and we try to do the most in-depth discussion that we can, the good things, the bad things, absolutely everything about it. So try to delve deep into what makes games good, what makes specific games work and what doesn't work, and that kind of thing. So this week we are talking about The Thin Silence by 2PM Games,
followed up by the sequel, The Fat Noise.
Is it?
That joke fell flat.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, you never know,
I'll shut up.
That sounds actually a little bit disgusting, the fat noise. But yeah, so this game, I won't say anything. I always let other people talk first, and so the instructions, as usual, though, to everyone, is that the first things that we say are always the positive things, and then we get into the constructive criticism later. So which one of you fine gentlemen would like to speak first?
Zach, do you want to go first? I'll let the guest go first because I'm here more often.
Okay.
All right, yeah, sounds good to me.
Thank you. Just so I know, this was whose pick?
This is mine.
So let's see. Positive things. This game is ambiance, and so there is a certain the otherworldly feel of this game is there, and I did enjoy that quite a bit. And part of that is brought to it by the pixel graphics, which I tend to be a fan of pixel graphics done well.
Those and it was it was minimalist too, right? Which I think kind of, it's not a creepy game necessarily, but it kind of adds how the blank face and the minimalism of that kind of adds to that. There's a lot to be said to that, which going later when you're done giving your positives. But I just wanted to mention how it just kind of gives you that weird uneasiness.
Yeah, right. There is sort of when you go through photographs and stuff, and there's just these faceless, but there's some level of, I guess, depth that comes out of the writing, the world building that went into fleshing them out. But against the lack of detail in the graphics, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think another positive that I came across was this game. I think had a goal. I know it had a goal because it mentions it, where it explores depression, specifically anxiety, mental disorder, that sort of stuff, but most specifically depression, and it set out to create a message through art, and I think it did that overall very well through the graphics, which you were talking about, through the ambiance, through the storytelling with the various settings and I don't know, lore, I guess you'd call it, background with the things that you pick up and discover. I thought that it did really well with that. Now, and I think that was its main goal. So, if you were to judge it based on that, that's A plus.
Yeah, I definitely completely agree that the graphics on this worked, specifically for what they were trying to do. I think that that the graphic style I really enjoyed. Very minimalist, right? The characters were only a few pixels each.
It reminded me of the style of Gods Were Watching, I think it was called.
Okay.
I don't think I've played that. Have you played that, Zach?
List to do, but I'm aware of its style. Yeah. Thinking of so, and this is a little bit critical, but I think it's okay. So it reminded me of I think it's Swords and Sorcery, or
yeah, you're right.
I think that they did it better, and it also reminded me of The Last Door, which I played the first season of, which I think that used the minimalist pixel graphics to better effect. But this is up there with that sort of. Both of those allowed your imagination to sort of fill in.
What kind of,
which is the whole point of like pixel art, is it allows your imagination to do what maybe you don't have the artist or budget, or maybe just your aesthetic isn't going to like spoon feed what you'll fill in. You have to fill in the gaps yourself visually.
Yeah, and I think that, other than the uneasiness, that the fact that it's minimalist and it has like, especially the blank faces, I think allows you to easier imprint yourself onto those characters, and especially if you're someone who happens to deal with things like depression, it kind of allows you to put yourself in the game and creating probably a stronger emotional reaction.
Right, I think that's a good point. Actually, is because the character was so featureless that he didn't have to be any specific person. He could very well have been me.
It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder though if they did that on purpose, or if it was just a happy accident because they just didn't have either the skill in pixel art, which I don't think is the case because the backgrounds are really detailed.
Yeah.
Or sometimes a lot of times pixel art is because they don't have the resources to create something more detailed. So I wonder what they would say if you asked them.
Yeah, I thought certainly the graphical style worked for. I wouldn't say it's like really, really amazing pixel art. It's not like Ben Chandler style.
I've seen
level of graphics.
I know a bunch of really talented pixel artists. You can make some super detailed, beautiful art.
Or it's not Matt Frith level or that, but it is minimalist. Even the backgrounds, which are well done, but they are minimalist, right? It's not like just like you're not going to say, "I'm going to hang this in a museum" per se. Although I don't know, you might.
You mentioned museum because I consider this because this is one of those games that people will argue, it's not a game, even though it's probably more of a game than say like.
Oh, it's definitely a game. There's a lot of gameplay.
There's some puzzle elements to it. But the point is, it's definitely more narrative, and I would say it is more artistic than most games. I'm one to say that just about every game is art, but this, when you're thinking of traditional art, it is more artistic than.
And of course, every game is art. I mean, I think game development in general is an art, right? Like every piece of music is art. Even if it's not good, it's art to a certain degree, right? And that's in the same way. Absolutely, every game is art. It is a piece of art. Even the ones that aren't good are art. They're just not very good art. But yeah, I mean, it is an art form. So, yeah.
So, I mean, Vance, we've talked about this quite a bit, and so you know that my position is the same. Is that every piece of every game is art, but this, there's like sort of pop art, and then there's sort of like more artistic art, and this is definitely more in the artistic art sort of
right. What do they call it? I'm not an art. Yeah, I'm not an art critic. There's a word for it. It's like high art and pop art or something. I don't know what they call them, but yeah.
Right.
Snobby art.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that this game's snobby. I'm just.
Right. There's more gameplay elements here than there is in a lot of other high art games.
Yeah, I mean, compared to like a lot of the walking sims, I mean, those are just literally walk around, maybe pick up a thing or two, but it doesn't help you progress. It just is a thing that you do. Yeah. Whereas this, there's actually small puzzles and you pick up items that help you move forward. It's not like they're optional for story purposes. You have to do it. So there are game mechanics involved. It's not just an experience.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, speaking of that, would you consider that a good thing in this game, or are you going to lump the? Would you have rather it be more experience heavy and just like a walking sim, similar to what is that game? I'm gonna have to look it up, but there's another game that was like this kind of game with pixel art, and you're just walking through different places, picking up story and that sort of stuff, but it was pretty much entirely that, just walking. Or did you appreciate the fact that they added these mechanics in?
Okay, so at the risk of turning more toward the critical side, although this is maybe not so critical as just something I don't understand very well. This is one of a few different games I have played, and I'm not a big puzzle platform gamer, but I have played a few puzzle platformers, and it baffles me a little bit that that people choose the genre of a puzzle platformer to make a narrative game, because to me it's not congruent. Mm-hmm. Like I like solving puzzles in puzzle platformers, right? And we talked about the last puzzle platformer we played, which was what was the name of it? With the colors.
What?
Painting the colors.
Oh, Nihilumbra?
Yes, Nihilumbra, the last puzzle platformer we made. And I mentioned that when we talked about that, is that it was really light on story, but I didn't care. It was a puzzle platform. I wasn't there for the story. I was there for the puzzles, and it delivered. And so it's weird to me that, and this isn't the only one, right, that people choose to make puzzle platformers as narrative games. Like, I like the narrative.
I think the medium,
puzzles, but it's weird.
I don't know
why I choose this genre.
I think the medium does lend itself a little bit. I mean, I think point and click, obviously more so, as opposed to that, which is what you're used to.
Or RPGs or walking sims. A lot of genres seem more conducive to this sort of like storytelling and mood inducing.
I don't know. I've seen there's been like a rash of puzzle platformers, which I don't know if I would call this a platform. I mean, I guess there's some platforming elements, but either way, there's been a rash of puzzle platformers that have had narrative focuses I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a main focus of them, but like Celeste had this subtle story that you're going through. What was another one that Seasons After Fall, I think it was called. It was kind of like that. I don't know. I mean, I appreciate. I mean, it's to me, it's more like icing on the cake. You know what I mean? It's when you're adding narrative to a puzzle platformer. It's just, there's more incentive to complete things and to explore if you have like little hidden areas, on certain stages and things like that. So
I take a different. So, Vance, your comment that like, why would you pick this? It rings to me like, why would you make an oil painting when you could just take a photograph and more easily represent a scene to someone? Mm-hmm. But if this is an art form, then the medium is whatever they've picked, and sometimes that medium is more challenging to get across.
But I think there are reasons that someone would make an oil painting rather than take a picture. The feeling that an oil painting evokes is different than the feeling that a photograph evokes. You're not necessarily trying to represent.
I would say exactly the same thing, right? So a platformer, and it's maybe more challenging to get that. And I just so I'll say, I'm a big fan of Braid, and I think that Braid does that, and I think that you're not as you don't think as deserving as a piece of art sort of status as I do, but he evokes certain emotions.
Here's the thing about Braid, not to get too off topic about Braid, but I loved Braid.
Braid is a good example.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Braid. I thought that it was a very well-designed game as a puzzle platformer. The story, I didn't care one bit about. I didn't care one bit about the story. It didn't hit me at all because it's a puzzle platformer.
Well, I think that's the point, right? You know what I'm saying? I hear what you're saying, but I'm just saying, for me, it hit me in that way, and so that's why it's a piece of art to me. And so I think that this game is doing a similar thing. It's trying to weave these puzzle elements as its medium, like its artistic medium. And whether it does that or not, that's what we're discussing, sort of, right? But that's the medium that these, I think, 2 developers chose, and so they chose to evoke the emotions and thoughts that we hopefully received.
And I'll reiterate that I think calling it a puzzle platformer is a little bit liberal with the term, because I didn't think the platforming was necessarily challenging. It was just a matter of using the correct tool.
You're right about that.
It's not a particularly challenging puzzle platformer, but I think that's the genre that it falls into, unless you have another idea of another genre that it falls into. But
when you think of platformers, jumping is a big mechanic and hitting platforms, and that's not a mechanic here, right? So is that what you're saying?
Well, you've said this before, Zach, that you think that you have to have jumping as the main mechanic for something to be a platformer. But I think you're thinking of action platformers.
Wait, if you're not jumping from platform to platform, then what is a platformer?
Your goal is to get to the next platform. In this game, you're doing so by using different tools. The entire mechanic of the gameplay side of the game is to get from one platform to the next. Well, the fact that you're just not jumping, I just think you're using different ways to do it.
I don't know if I would.
It's a puzzle platformer.
I think this is. I think there just happens to be platforms in this. Platforms aren't the main use. They're not being used as the main thing to get from point A to point B. Because if you're just saying, well, you're going from this place to this place, and there's platforms in between, that's a platformer. It's. I mean, you can kind of say that you can make a maze, have them jump a gap, and call that a platformer. You know what I mean?
No, but when you're genreing a game, if that's a word, genreing.
It is now.
A game, you have to take out all narrative elements, because games aren't genred based on narrative elements. Games are genred based on gameplay. So when you're deciding what genre a game is in, you have to take out all narrative elements and say, what is the core mechanic?
Puzzle.
that drives this game forward.
Puzzle and
the
adventure.
core mechanic, what it is that you do to get further in the game, is you get to the next platform.
You get
and
to
then
the
you
exit.
walk along that, and then you get to the next platform.
You get to
and
the
then
exit.
eventually you get to the exit.
I don't think, because I think you're saying that. I mean, I feel like we're getting hung up on this, but I but I think you're focusing on the platforms as if it's like a main point of the gameplay, whereas it's get from point A to point B while experiencing the narrative. It's not get to this next platform, get to this next platform, get to this next platform. It just happens that some areas had platforms in it, is what I'm saying. It was just coincidental.
I do want to point out, guys, it's been over a week since I'm pretty sure there is a jump button. It just does nothing in this game.
You jump like 2 inches off the ground.
Yeah, there is a jump button.
You just sort of like hop a little bit.
Yeah.
And there are 2 times during the course of the game that I actually used it to make some progress. So I actually did use the jump button twice to get somewhere that otherwise I could not have gotten. Although, I mean, I'm sure I could have, probably by some other means, but twice I did, though.
I'm trying to think of what the other. So I mentioned, keeping on the positives, I mentioned that this game had one main goal, which was to bring a message to the player about depression through narrative. I personally thought that out of everything they did, that was the biggest success. Through the art, through the ambience, through the music, through the narrative, everything, the message was hit home, I think, for whoever might struggle with depression, and those who don't may have a better understanding of depression, especially once you get to the end and it really just becomes clear of how it feels. And spoilers, because this is a game, we do this every week, but we expect people who are listening to this, this is not necessarily a review, it's more of a discussion of a final game. Right. So whoever's listening to this should have played.
We go in depth, so spoilers are fair game. So everyone, our standard disclaimer.
Yeah. So at the end, he basically is talking to his mother, who is dead, and goes on to talk about his struggle and how he didn't open up. He was afraid to open up because people thought he was a strong person. He thought he was going to be felt like a fraud because he was hiding all that underneath that stoic exterior. And so it did a really good job of kind of using metaphor and imagery and some background on the characters and the things that he found in the world that he was in. World quote because it wasn't really. It was pretty existential, I would say, but
Sure.
but and then at the end they really hammered it home, like this is how it is for a lot of people who struggle with this. Maybe now you can understand. And he talked about how other people made him feel, and why he felt like he couldn't talk about it, and to help those who aren't struggling but may know those who are, to not be like, hey, stop being sad. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that sort of thing. I thought they did a fantastic job with all that.
Yeah. I thought it took a little bit long for me to kind of get to the meat. But that's a criticism, so I won't say that too much. But inevitably they did a good job of conveying the point. So yeah, I agree there.
So I do have to ask, because I'm not sure when you want to transfer to start going over to negatives, but the first time you played this, real quick, the first time you played this, you were getting super pissed off. I know you were just gotten off a stressful week of game dev for the Game Jam, but have you found that taking that time off was like, okay, it's not as bad as what it felt like, or is it still?
Yeah. I'll get into my criticisms of it, and there are certainly some criticisms of it, which were, I think, amplified by the fact that, number one, I just gotten out of a 2-week game jam of not sleeping and working constantly to make a game in 2 weeks.
For as long as I've known you, I think you've only slept once. Like the past. So
possibly. and on top of that, releasing my commercial game Unicorn Dungeon right after the end of that game jam, which was a stupid decision. I don't know who chose that release date. Oh wait, it was me. So yeah, so after all that, then and I had no time, obviously. So I was like, the day before, I was like, okay, I need to play this game because I gotta do the Indie Fireside. And I just couldn't at that time.
Which is why we postponed till this week. And
yeah,
I don't blame you. It's not that was. I know it can be stressful for the game jam. Never done one myself, but I did basically do a stream with you guys. Still not as stressful, but I was awake for most of that time. That was during the IRX jam last year.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what was? Maybe we'll let Zach go first again with the criticisms.
I'll say my piece for sure, but let's go the rounds first and get back to me. So Zach.
Wow. Okay. So actually, I have a lot of criticisms for this game. So I'll just say one, and then maybe you guys will bring up other stuff. Primarily, I think that this game was incredibly slowly paced, and some of that's just like you walk extremely slowly, you climb extremely slowly, but it doesn't help that the puzzles are realistic. You typically can figure out very quickly what you need to do, but it's just walking to the right spot.
Yeah, I think the pace really kind of is a product of a bunch of other criticisms, and between the UI with the items and how you use them, and then the walking, which I think has to do with their choice of creating that depressive atmosphere. You're walking slowly through these dreary worlds, and it just becomes that, and that's kind of a pitfall of a lot of narrative games in general. Is pacing anyway, and then on top of all that, then it's kind of pacing tends to be very personalized. Like people, it depends on the person. Some people have the attention span for it, other people's not so much. So.
I think you're in, right? So, yeah. No, I understand that, and like you said, it might be that it's part of the aesthetic. You want this slow-paced game because that's sort of what depression is. It's sometimes just a slog through something. Yeah. So I get, but that's still a criticism I have. This was a difficult game to enjoy.
I agree. Yeah, I still agree. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm. No, and that is absolutely one of the notes that I have written down here is so slow. It's like this game. What is my playtime on it on Steam? 19 hours. Now I can't say that sat there and literally played this game for 19 hours, because
you must have left
a
that
lot
open.
of times what I do is I'll leave it running and I'll go do something else and come back to it. But still, even though I wasn't probably playing it constantly for 19 hours straight, that is the time from, it's not like I put it on and went to sleep. So, you know, I might have done some other stuff in between, but it's a very long game. And I think it probably should be about a quarter of its length. And a lot of the reason if it's so long is because it just takes forever to get anywhere. You have to walk over here, climb up here, and walk over here.
I think they could have.
And...
I think they could have conveyed the same feeling and the same narrative in a more compressed version of it. You're right about it being shorter. With the walking, I'm still. I mean, it was very, very slow to the point where it's aggravating almost. But at the same time, I'm more understanding of it because of the message and because of what they're trying to go for. But if you're going to do that, I think that they should have definitely have condensed it down into maybe a 1 hour game, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Like they either should have done one of two things, and one of the things that they could have done is just made less content, which would have been fine. I think that this game would have been actually better if it was a bit more condensed.
And here's an idea for the devs, if they ever happen to listen to this. Because I know it's kind of like it's your baby, and you know this since you make games, but you have all this background and history to these characters, so it's hard to look at it that way and like start cutting stuff out of it. So maybe what if you do this? What if you condense the game down to a more reasonable play time for something that is slower paced, and then have that additional stuff, maybe write up like a diary or something like that, or what's the word I'm thinking of? The what's the word of a bunch of stories put together?
Short story collection?
No. Anthology.
Okay. Yes.
So, or maybe like an anthology and add it on. I don't know if you necessarily need to sell that, but it could be like an ad, like, hey, you play this game, check out this, this gives, if you're interested in the world, check out this. If you're interested in what else we've got going on, check out this stuff, and just kind of add it on to the game for those who are interested, so that way it's not slowing down everyone else who just wants to play the game. And you have to, while you do want to maintain your message and what you're going for, you do have to understand that other people are playing your game. So you do need to take that into account.
And that's a balance. It always is a balance between your narrative and your gameplay. And that's kind of one of the unique challenges of making games rather than, say, writing a book. Because when you're writing a book, your narrative is what you're doing. You can pace your narrative however you feel for your narrative. But when you're making a game, you have to realize that you're making a game. And it's one of the hardest things about
And since you said there are two things to do, and one of them was to reduce the content, so in this game it has almost a schizophrenic story where like you go into like a sci-fi sort of scenario at one point. I feel like that whole there's a lot of things that could have been lopped off, like closed loops of story.
Yeah, with it being so existential and out there, I think it would be fairly easy to take out whole chunks of it, like you're saying, because it's not so linear as far as the narrative goes. So
I think the entire first section of the game, to me, I had no interest in the story whatsoever because I couldn't understand it. It seemed like the story started in the second act, and there's 4 acts, right? 4? Yeah. I think there's 4. The first act, to me, I didn't even really see the story.
They wrote it like M. Night Shyamalan and Quentin Tarantino had a baby.
Yeah. So like that whole first act should have been like the first 10-minute introduction for the game, not an entire quarter of the game. And then, like Zach said, you have this weird change in tone changing stories suddenly for this entire section is the third act, right? And so, okay, what's this all about?
Which
Yeah,
I gotta
so
admit, that might have been my favorite part of the game, and yet
yeah,
it's completely
didn't
like
fit. Yeah,
Well, yeah, weird tonality with the setting and the story too. With towards the end, where he was like in a town full of people, and it felt brighter. And because there were people, I mean, it was still depressed. It was still depressing and dreary, but it was brighter than the rest of the game, or most of the rest of the game. And because there were people, it felt more. It didn't feel as dreary because company and stuff like that and people around is tends to be bring your spirits up a little bit. So after being so isolated and by yourself in this place for so long, and but at the same time, at that point in the narrative, the narrative itself was getting more and more depressing, but the setting was like strangely less depressing.
Yeah, that's you're absolutely right about that. And I didn't even think about it at the time because I was actually so glad to be in a less dreary scenario that I was like, oh yeah, thank goodness. But yeah, you're actually right. It's like that's the point at the story in your usual I don't know what you call it, in your usual dramatic story arc. That's usually the point in your story when you need the hero to be at his lowest point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's when he needs to hit the wall and be at the lowest point so that he can come back and has that catalyst for his realization. But in fact, the last act was, or actually not even the end of the game, but just actually right at that point when he should have had that lowest catalyst moment is when it was the brightest, sort of the cheeriest, not cheery in it by any means, but the cheeriest part of this game.
In their defense, as far as that goes, they do say in their description that this isn't about fighting through depression and gaining success, like of fighting it off. It's more about the middle of that, like of already being depressed and taking you through depression through that lowest point, and then just kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but not actually getting there. Like so the ending is pretty unsatisfactory as far as feeling good about what you've done throughout the whole game. But they do say that in their description of the game, like this isn't about achieving success, as far in regards to, in this case, depression. It's just about getting through that whole midsection of it, of feeling shittier, feeling shittiest, and then, oh wait, I kind of see the end of the tunnel here, and then that's where it ends.
Sure. Yeah, and I was just kind of referring to the classical dramatic structure. That
the hero's
generally in any story, that is the point where you should put the hero at his biggest weakness, right? And in this game, it kind of didn't. Not that I'm thinking everything needs to follow that, but just kind of pointing that out. But.
So for me, since Zach mentioned the pacing and how slow it was, and I think one of my criticisms helped feed into that was the UI. I mentioned that earlier. And I thought that, because once you start getting items and items and items that help you through, you keep them the entire time. But you have this long-ass scroll wheel thing of items that you're just like, okay, well, there's this one thing I need to get through, to get around, to get over, whatever, to continue. Which one of my 150 items do I use to get through this? And that the fact that you have to sit there, I mean, it's not, the puzzle itself is not hard. It's just like figuring out which thing is used best for this particular obstacle. And that really slows it down because you're just sitting there just scrolling through your stuff, trying it.
And even if you know right off the bat, because
finding it,
you just see, it's just like, okay, I have to do this again. I have to press Q and then press it until I get way back here to this thing. And, the UI in general was terrible, terrible in this game. In fact, that is probably one of the main reasons that when I first started playing this game, I just couldn't play it, because it is so unintuitive to play that it just, trying to remember what button to press to do something shouldn't be the challenging part of your gameplay. And yet, I would say throughout 19 hours of playing this game, according to Steam, I never entirely got used to the controls. Never entirely. They were annoying and grating on me the entire game. Just, I think, not well designed.
Yeah.
Also, so it's not even just the controls. It's the fact that it feels like these are not puzzles, but just obstacles that you know what you need to do the second you see it, which you mentioned. And okay, you're like, oh, I see a rock. I need to switch to the hook to climb it. Oh, and there's a peg there and a peg there, so I got to get the tightrope thing. And like you see everything you need to do in almost every case. It's really just like it's a button pressing UI sort of. That's the mechanic, is moving through the UI. It's not thinking.
Yeah, you're so right. It's just the tedium of doing it. It's not the joy of discovery how to do it, because it's obvious. It's the tedium of doing it. It's 19 hours of just the tedium of execution without the joy of discovery, which maybe is a good description of depression. So who knows? I mean,
yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, because of the message, a lot of the criticisms are like, well, maybe it was on purpose because of the depression
right.
thing. But
so they get a little bit of a pass, but right, I don't know.
The kind of connected to the UI too is the animation. I mean, we talked about the jumping a little bit, where you're jumping like 2 inches off the ground. We're like, why is it even a thing in this game? But even all the animations and things like that, like when you use the boot to kick, for instance, I think that's the first thing you get, is like, it's very unsatisfying using the items, because when you like go to kick something, you're like, I don't even know the words to explain it, but it's just like, did I kick it or did it just fall over? You know, like I don't really like it. Usually when you put these things in a game, it's like, thump, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I definitely kicked that thing. I could see the connection. I heard the connection. There was some weight to it, and this is just like a little, like just like the jumping. It was just a little like, and
yeah,
it almost like
it's probably
whiffed.
Closer to the sound of actually kicking a rock, because I mean rocks don't really reverberate. So
Yeah.
But yeah.
I don't know, and that was like, it didn't like hurt the game per se, but it was just, I don't know, there was something very unsatisfying about it to me.
I thought some of the sound design was really good, though.
I think the ambient sound design was.
Well, some of the sound effect design as well. Like, I loved just when you try to use the sign, it's just something you very rarely use, but just that sign, he just gets out and like bangs it on his head or something, and it makes a very satisfying sound.
What was that, Zach?
Was that useful for anything? I can't remember ever using it.
Yeah, you row the boat with it, and you also combine it with some things to make a lever, and
it goes into a lot of crafting. A zip line, I think.
Zip line. Yeah, but you also use it as an oar to row boats too.
Right.
Were we missing any criticisms?
Oh, I'm sure we are. Let me see. I've got my list here. Let's see. I've got the fact that the window size on this game is so goddamn small.
You don't have an option to expand it at all.
Unplayable. So I started it full screen, I think, once, and then it reverted back and I couldn't get it to go to full screen again. And if I quit it, I could restart it and get it to go to full screen for like a second, and then it would revert back. I don't know if that's something was going on. Just
No, it was
with my system.
It was
Maybe
small
it
for
didn't
me
happen
as
with
well.
Other people, but
It was small for me
just
as well.
this tiny little window. I had to sit there like with my eyes 2 inches away from my screen, so I could even see the damn thing.
Yeah, I thought that was weird.
I think if possibly, I wish the dev was here so that I could ask him, because I wonder if he purposely made the game almost unbearable to play, just like to kind of simulate depression, or if this was all just.
That's what we've been asking. That's what we've been asking of everything that we have had criticism about. Just what, like, I can't tell if it's on purpose or not, because it's either genius or they just were not focused on the gameplay rather than the narrative.
Right.
I mean, if I was them, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, definitely genius. We did it on purpose."
Yeah. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh yeah, there are several points in the game where you can get into situations in which you cannot get yourself out of them, except to quit the game.
There's what? Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no. What do you mean? There's a reset? Do I not know of a
you
reset?
Can sort of like, if you get stuck, you can kill yourself or something, and you restart the.
No, you can get stuck in a hole where you cannot die, and you cannot
just
get out.
Just let me die.
Yeah, there's no way for you to die.
But again,
there's no way for you to get out.
But again, Vance, that's depression.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in a hole. I can't die, and I can't get out.
Yeah. There it is again. Yeah. So, but yeah, several times that happened to me during the course of the game in many different points. I wouldn't say like all the time, but maybe 10 times or so I found situations like that, where you could get into somewhere where you could not move and couldn't die and just had to quit out of the game and come back in. And it did, restart you, at the last save point. So, I mean, it wasn't like you had to redo all that much. But, I mean, it's the same thing as if you were to die. But it's just annoying to have to quit back out and come back in again.
Right.
So there's that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm adjusting camera. There we go.
Never mind.
Now I really want to. Maybe we can do a follow up.
What?
With the devs and just ask them about these things.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. This is a little bit meta here, but if and it depends on how much time you have, Vance. But like, if it could be like a companion. Like a little mini companion show where you can interview the devs, and because we mentioned we talked about this I think before, if the devs should be on or not, and we're like no, because it's just it's a conflict of interest when we're talking about stuff, and
right.
But maybe there could be like a little companion thing, like they can explain or talk about some of the criticisms that we had and that sort of stuff, and like a little short show put on some other time. And it's up to you to think about.
Criticize them to their face, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons as well that I
it's
don't
all
really
constructive
want.
criticism.
Yeah, it is constructive. I
don't have a problem criticizing to the face. It's the reciprocation that is the issue, because there's sometimes people don't take criticism well.
So. Right. Is that they would probably want to defend themselves, and the whole show would either turn into an interview or a defense or that kind of thing. And really, we just want to analyze the game and discuss it, what worked and what didn't work without, that sort of.
But that's why, like, I think like a little separate thing altogether, where it could be that, I think would be interesting. But that's
right.
Up to you, because that's your time that would be spent mostly. So.
Or maybe like a written thing where maybe
that too.
Sort of a written interview published on the site.
Yeah.
Let's see. I got a couple more things. Does anybody else want to say something? Go ahead. Got a few more notes, but almost.
I think a lot of my stuff is already covered in a broader spectrum, so I don't know about Zach though.
Yeah, I did feel that I was lost, but I feel like we covered that to some degree. Things sort of gelled by the end of it, but a sci-fi-ish thing, and you also feel like you're in some sort of war-torn.
Yeah, the guy who invented a teleportation machine was just weird and out of place in this game.
Well, maybe they got a little lost in metaphor.
Well, I guess that's the question. Do you feel that everything in here actually fits into a metaphor, or do you?
Well, that's what I think. I think maybe they went down the rabbit hole a little too far, to the point where like it made sense in their heads, but maybe not to the people who didn't make the game.
Constantly questioning, like, okay, is this game like a metaphor for depression, or is it a guy telling a story of a guy and his depression so that you can relate to him? And those are two pretty different things. And I never really got, like, there is an answer to that. You probably know the answer to this. I just don't. I never got it out of the story.
No, actually, that's a good question, to be honest. Now I'm thinking about it.
So this actually ties into one of the notes that I have as well. So I'll go into that. Is that I thought that by the end of it, especially, in that third act, especially when it got into that third act, and then a lot of the fourth act too, I felt was more political commentary than some sort of personal narrative. It seemed like
maybe they had a lot to say.
Political critique game, instead of a personal journey game. It did seem to lose focus. It seemed to forget what kind of game it was.
And you know what? Going back to the pacing of it, that whole point where you're like, "What the fuck's going on?" Like Zach said, cut it out.
Yeah.
Cut it out, and then you'd have a condensed game that's, you can still keep it slow paced, but it'll be shorter, so it won't be as bad as far as that goes.
Yeah. I think that's it for what I've got. Oh, I was just going to mention one thing, which is neither here nor there, but I think this game would have been made much better, or one of the things that could have been made it much better would have been voice acting. I think this kind of, narrative-based game really could have been improved drastically with some voice acting in it. Yep.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, when you start adding voices, and it's kind of like the whole like silent protagonist thing that a lot of game does, because they want you to again they want you to put yourself into the shoes of the character. So that might have taken away from that if that was their
I see that too.
Decision, but I could see if you were, and again, and that goes back to what Zach asked: are you telling the story of a person who you relate to, or are you telling? Is there a broader message of depression that is supposed to be anyone who's playing it?
And by the end of it, because we talked before about how the character was fairly featureless, could have represented anyone, but I mean, by the end of it, I knew for certain that character wasn't me. I've never been made the king of a country. I mean, that's certainly not a story about me.
Well, but that was definitely metaphor, especially if you play to the end, because he's talking about how he's like basically the Rock, the leader of the people that he's putting on this front for. And I think that the king, being made the king of a country, is a metaphor for him, being that person who's shouldering all that weight.
You can always make the metaphor argument. It just, to me, it felt like by the end of it, it was clearly a story about somebody else living through entirely different experiences than I've ever lived through.
And we could also, and this may be bullshit too, but since we're calling it, since it's art, I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder then, because people, you don't explain, if you make a piece of art, you don't explain it to someone because you want that person to, they're the ones that are making decisions of what that art means to them. So maybe to you it was just a story of someone else that was very strange, as opposed to someone else who's like, that's me, I've experienced all these emotions. So maybe that's the case too. And I feel like
you guys are. It sounds like you guys are saying we're all three of us are saying very similar things, which is we're a little bit unclear when this is a story and when this is some other message. To me, art has its meaning because it's this communication from the artist to me, and so my personal, eye of the beholder view of it is not so important. So. If it is that.
Yeah, I kind of am on your side a little bit more on that too, Zach. Is that I consider art to be a communication medium, which is in a lot of ways more effective communication for certain types of things than speech or writing, right? Like
I agree.
Music and games and whatnot
I agree with that to a point. I think that's just up to the creator whether or not you're using it as a communication tool or using it as a foundation for someone else to put their emotions into it or onto it or whatever you want to say. Mm-hmm. It all begins with the creator, and then from there it diverges to those decisions. Is it for communication? Is it for each person individually? Is it am I going to use these metaphors or am I telling a story? That sort of stuff. So I agree with you to a point. It's just it all goes back to the root there. So we'll never really know unless they say so. And then even then it's up to you. And then the person who's viewing the art or experiencing the art, sometimes you don't want to know. I think in this case we do, but but sometimes you don't want to know because it had an effect on you one way or the other. And if it kind of ruins the mystique in that whole emotional attachment, if someone explains it off to you as like, oh, that's not how I felt at all. Now it's just kind of like, now that's all I'm going to think about. So
I think that is often the case when something really is effective and really does affect you in a certain way. Is that I kind of agree with you on that. Is that you don't really want to know what they meant by it because it already has some meaning to you. But on the other side, this game, I'm kind of like, okay, you did some things well, but I'm really wondering what you meant by this. Really, by some of these things.
So what was the time machine a metaphor for?
Yeah.
Maybe, okay, I'm going to speculate. Maybe the time machine was him wishing that he could go back in time to a time before maybe his mother died or before he got dragged into this depression.
I think it's a teleportation machine. I don't think there was a time machine.
Same difference. Right? Same difference.
Yeah, don't you know time and space are the same thing?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, space.
Yeah, Einstein.
The same.
Anyone else have anything else, or how long are we going for? About an hour.
I think about an hour. Yeah. So I think that might be all I have here.
We'll get the next game up since today is the first. We'll have to hound because it's Eric's turn. For those of you who don't watch Indie Game Riot, Eric is my co-host on Indie Game Riot. So it's his turn to pick a game for Fireside.
Yeah, maybe he'll actually come on and talk about it this time. I'm like,
last time I texted him, he just straight up didn't respond. So he's a little bitch. Eric, send your hate mail, Eric at indiegameriot.com. All right, man. Well, take it away.
Yeah. So that was Indie Game Riot. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, if you weren't able to make it and you have other comments on the Thin Silence, feel free to come into the Discord and I'll talk to you more about the game there if you want, in the Indie Fireside chat channel. So you can do that if you'd like as well.
And devs.
Anybody who's watching this after it recorded. Yeah,
devs,
and if
you
you're a
haven't
dev,
watched it,
come in as well.
Talk to Vance, because we're very curious as to all these things. I do think it's a good. I think a written, again, it's up to you if you have time. I think that'd be a really cool idea. Just getting I guess I don't know if you'd call it a post-mortem of each episode, but just something.
I'm gonna have to decide if I have the time. A lot of times I think that I have the time for things that I in fact don't, and then I overburden myself. So I'm gonna have to carefully consider.
It helps that you don't sleep. So
yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Vance, for doing this once again this month, and thank you, Zach, for coming on. Appreciate it. You've been a very good conversationalist.
Thank you.
Very, very insightful, and we'll see you at the end of next month. What is the last Friday of July? Or June, I mean. It is the 29th.
That is going to be the 29th, yeah.
Yes. So June 29th should be the next one that we're going to do, and we'll announce in our Discord. Again, the Discord, if you're watching live, is below the stream. There's a button. If you're watching a recorded version, it'll be a link in the description, and it's also on our website. But you can join the Discord anytime and be a part of this, just like Zach. All right. Well, see you later, everybody.
Yep. Take care, everyone.